Hello and welcome to Zach Gerber. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be
So,
here. I'm excited.
so for anyone who doesn't know, Zach Gerber is an audio engineer and producer from Woodstock, Ontario, Canada. Zach has been touring professionally for a decade and has done shows in over 25 countries around the world, working for artists including Walk Off the Earth, Serena, Ryder, and Tim Hicks. Zach is also the owner of Skytrack Studios, an audio recording and post-production studio located in Cambridge, Ontario. And at the studio, he focuses on guiding artists through the journey of finding their sound and getting the most out of their songs. So super cool to have you here.
Thanks again for having me.
The first thing that I wanted to ask you is just what is your kind of role in the industry and how did you get into it?
Well, I guess I kind of carry two roles right now, spread out between the touring and the studio work. I got into touring when I was, I guess, 18 years old, and a band I was playing in just got this freak opportunity to go across the ocean and do 2 weeks of shows in the UK. And that's where I started touring, and I really got a bug for it, and I loved it. And then my friend Ian, who I know that you guys have had on the podcast, Ian Blackwood, I was working at his recording studio and learning about recording from him and learning how to do that whole side of the industry back in 2012 when Walk Off the Earth blew up. And when they first blew up and they started touring, he was originally going out and teching for them. But he very quickly realized that it was going to be a very full-time job and didn't necessarily want to take that on. And so he called me. And I've been touring with them ever since. So that's how I got into touring. And then I got into recording just by playing in bands, just because I love music. And whenever the bands I was in would go into the recording studio, I would just be so into it and so intrigued how it all came together and what the process was. And I learned very quickly that it was something I loved. And so I decided to do it and learn how to do it for myself.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It must have been a crazy experience just jumping into that and getting that call.
It was insane. It was a really funny thing. Ian called me. So I knew Ian was in Europe with Walk Off the Earth. And he called me at like 6 a.m, Ontario time. And I was like, why is Ian calling me? I know he's in Europe. I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked up the phone and he's like, Zach, I can't do this. Do you want to see the world? It's like, yes, I do. And then it happened. I mean, with that band, it happened so fast. So I got that phone call. And then a month later, we were doing a festival in Sofia, Bulgaria, opening up for Sean Paul. And it just happened like that. And it was like, wow. What happened? So that happened real fast.
Wow. What can you tell everybody just a little bit of what your job entails when you're on tour with Walk Off?
Yeah, my job has taken quite a few roles throughout the almost decade now I've been touring with them. But I've done everything from what my main job now is I take care of their backline. So what that means is I set up their drums, I restring all of their guitars while they're playing on stage. I tune the guitars that they aren't using and swap out instruments with them when they need new instruments and that sort of thing. But for 3 or 4 years, I was doing that and mixing their monitors at the same time. So controlling what they hear in their ears and making sure that they can hear themselves all right so that they can perform. And I also continue to play a number of songs with them. If you guys know anything about Walk Off the Earth, they kind of have this quirky thing where they just bring in a whole bunch of people and there's lots of people on stage and everyone's doing crazy stuff. So I still get out there and I get to play lots of drums and a little bit of guitar still. So that's fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So being an audio engineer and working in a studio must be a very different experience from going on the road and touring with a band. Can you tell us about the difference between those two jobs?
I would say the main difference is when I work a studio day, I get to go home at the end of the day. And when I work a touring job, we sometimes won't come home for a month. So, I mean, that's I mean, for me, the biggest difference. There's a lot of crossover. When I tour, the days are really, really long. We usually load in at about 9 in the morning, and we usually don't close the trailer doors of the truck until, depending on the show, midnight, 1 in the morning. So they can be really long, grueling days. The studio's a little bit more laid back. The hours are a little easier. In a live sense, the biggest difference for me between live music and recording music is that live music has this added pressure of this has to work now because people are watching. Whereas if you run into a problem in the studio, you have as many hours as really you want to take to try to figure it out, or change something, or use a different instrument, or get a new tone, or whatever it happens to be, change a lyric. In the live world, if there's anything that needs to happen, it needed to happen like 5 minutes ago. So the live music world has this crazy added pressure of, there being an audience, and, the bands that I work for have this expectation that when I show up to do my job, they get to walk out on stage and not worry about any of that stuff. And I both, on some days, am annoyed by that pressure and then also thrive off of it too. There's something really, really special about, Walk Off has had this incredible opportunity to go out and do all these crazy shows. Sorry, I just had a pop-up on my computer, my bad. Can you still see me?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Walk Off has had the opportunity to, we've gone across to Europe and we've done festivals for 80,000 people. And when you do those sorts of shows, you don't want to screw them up. And you have this even more added pressure of, when we do a headlining show, we load in at 9 in the morning and we have the venue to ourselves all day. When you do a festival like that, you get the stage 45 minutes before you go on. And so your whole day is condensed down into this little period of time that you have to get right. But the payoff of all of that pressure is that when you do get it right and you get to go out and you do that show and it goes really, really well, you can't replace that feeling. It's the most amount of ecstasy you can experience. It's an incredible feeling.
Wow.
Man, I love that you're talking about the pressure of this particular role, because if you've seen a walk-off show, the production is incredible. And just from an audience perspective, we see all the stuff happening on stage, but behind the stage vibe is craziness. So do you think that you have, I have two questions. Do you think that you have maybe a certain temperament that puts you in a better position for handling what's required of your job on tour when you're off stage? And then the other question is, how do you deal with all the pressure, and what do you do if things get messed up?
Okay, great question.
Sorry, that was 3 questions. So
no, that's okay. Speaking to the temperament, one of my first mentors in the industry told me something that I still carry with me to this day. He said, good techs don't solve problems, they stop them before they even happen. So it's about the preparation and thinking ahead and really paying attention to all of the details and making yourself and forcing yourself look at every little piece of the show to make sure that everything is in place. And when you do that, you deal with less problems on the fly because you've already done the legwork ahead of time to make sure that there aren't any problems in the first place. So in terms of temperament, I would say that's the biggest thing that I carry every day into a venue with me. When I show up to do my job, I prevent problems as opposed to solving them when they come up. Inevitably, they do come up, and when they do come up, the best thing that you can do is just keep your cool. Because as soon as you lose your cool, you stop being able to think. And as soon as you stop being able to think, you can't solve the problem. So it's show business. The show must go on. It's live music. Weird stuff happens. And sometimes you can do all the things before the show right, and still weird stuff happens. And when those things do happen, you just have to calm yourself down, look at the problem, and ask yourself what you know about it and figure out why it's not working, and just step by step go through all the things that could make it stop working and figure out which one it is. And when you find the thing that it is, you fix it. And sometimes that takes longer than what you want it to. And sometimes it's messy and the audience is like, what's going on? And the band is like, what's going on? And that's a tough situation to be in. But you can't lose your cool. It's really, really important to not lose your cool, because if you lose your cool, you can't figure it out because you stop being able to think.
Yeah, that's some awesome advice. That's super important. Switching gears a little bit, when an artist would come to you, maybe in a studio setting, first of all, what are some of your tips or techniques that you would use in the studio to get the most potential out of them?
I would say kind of similar to when I walk into a venue and I approach my day with doing all of the work ahead of time to make sure that the show goes well. As a producer, what I try to push all of the artists that work with me toward doing is to prepare way more than what they think they have to prepare ahead of coming into the studio. A lot of artists come into the studio with this mentality of like, yeah, I have this idea and we're just going to kind of work on it and see what happens. And that is one way to approach a session. And there's a lot of space for creativity to happen in those moments. But I would take that mentality more toward a writing session than an actual recording session. There's a band that I've been working with, a really, really cool pop punk band called Hello Kelly. And the way it worked out is they needed to use my studio to track drums. And then their singer also produces music, so they did the rest of the recording at his studio, and then I'm mixing the songs. But when they came into the studio to track drums, we tracked like 12 songs in one day. And you can only really do that when you come in prepared. So this drummer came in, he didn't need a scratch track. You couldn't knock him off the click track. He was so tight. And then the singer was sitting in the control room with me, and he had each song already pre-drawn out on a grid, where as the drummer would play through each part of the song, he would either check off a verse or X out a verse if he's made a mistake. And he created very quickly this grid of like, okay, we don't have verse 1 because he's missed it the first 2 times we've done it, but we have the rest of the song. So we really need to make sure that we have verse 1 here. And we really only played each song 3, maybe 4 times at the most. And be like, if you're going to go into the studio, be that band. Don't be the band that comes in and sits down to play the song and goes, wait, how long is verse 2? Don't be that band, you know? You get what you put into it. So if you come in and you're a little bit unprepared, you may not think that it'll play out at the end product, but it's the bands who come in prepared and know exactly what they're doing that walk out of the studio with the highest quality product, because high quality recordings are very intentional. Again, there's space within the studio environment for that extra creativity, but it's the bands who come in that are intentional, that know what they're aiming at, that know what they're going for, that walk out with the best music. So that would be maybe my number one piece of advice for anyone who wants to go into a studio and record. Prepare more than what you think that you have to, because you'll thank yourself later for it.
For sure.
And what would you say to a solo artist that's coming in that you're producing and working with? What's some of your advice for someone like that? Because that's a totally different situation than a band that's played together for a while.
100%. So it depends on what you're looking for. If it's a solo artist who's coming in with just their guitar and their voice, and that's all that's really going to happen, and that's on purpose, then you can kind of carry the same mentality into it and being prepared. But if the understanding is, I'm going to come in with my acoustic guitar and my voice, but I also want to build out other things around it, that's a really fun scenario too. And for that sort of scenario, I would say the most important thing is to start that project with the end in mind. So maybe you don't have the ability to play all of the instruments, but have a plan for what instruments you want. Have song references that you can walk in and say, I really want it to sound like this. You know, it's just me and my acoustic guitar, but I really want it to sound like this song. It makes the production process a lot easier. As soon as you have an end goal in mind, it simplifies a lot of other decisions, like what should the bass guitar sound like? Does it need a key part? All of those sorts of things are answered when you can point at a piece of music and say, I want to go there. And so that's what I would suggest for solo artists who want to come in and kind of produce outside of what they're capable of because they don't have a band, you know?
Mm-hmm.
No, for sure. So what tips would you give to young musicians who are looking to become an audio engineer or producer? Did you go to school for audio engineering and producing?
I didn't know. And I'll bring up Ian Blackwood again because it's his fault. It's all his fault. I got into a school when I was 17 or 18 years old called Recording Arts Canada. It's in Toronto. And at the time I was working in his studio as an intern with bands. And he looked at me and he's like, congratulations, man, on getting into school, but I don't think you should go to school. And I actually think he was right. 90 to 95% of the people that I come across in this industry who are working in this industry, maybe with the exception of some of the musicians themselves, haven't gone to school for what they do. So all of the people that I tour with, except maybe one person, haven't gone to school. They just kind of showed up and worked the job. So that doesn't mean that you shouldn't think about education. There is tons and tons of online resources that you can tap into if you want to learn about something like, let's say, recording. And frankly, I'm still taking online courses because I always want to be learning. I never want to stop learning. And there's always stuff that I don't know. And I want to know those things. So if you want to get into, we'll talk about recording specifically, I would suggest not going to school. School's incredibly expensive. And from my experience, no one within the industry, you know, when I'm trying to get a job has asked me if I've gone to school. I don't think I've ever been asked that. I would encourage aspiring audio engineers to just find online courses and learn from that. And then just get some gear and start trying. That's how I got started recording music. I was maybe 14 or 15 years old and in a band, and we had a Mac with GarageBand on it, and we're like, let's try. And I still have those recordings, and they are so bad. And I love that because it was, you know, where I started, and I look back and it's like, man, I knew absolutely nothing, but here I am. You know, I get to do this for a living now, and I did it without going to school, and I think I did it because I really, 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 really wanted to, and I was willing to work for it. So be humble, find resources to help you, and outwork your peers, because you don't have to be the most talented person in the room if you're the hardest working person in the room. You can outwork the people around you and succeed, and I really believe that.
Agreed. What are some of the courses you're doing right now, or that you just maybe finished or were interested in? So
I'm doing 2 right now. There's this guy from around here. His name's Jordan Valeriot. He produces, or used to at least, a lot of the pop punk and kind of like melodic metal bands like Silverstein and stuff like that. And so he's got a full production suite that he calls the Pro Production course, I think it's called. Mm-hmm. And the course, he takes you all the way through tuning instruments, tuning drums, that sort of thing, to how to mic up a drum kit, to how to do all of the guitars and all of the vocals. He has an entire section on editing that's really, really important, because a lot of records, like all of the music that we listen to today is heavily, heavily, heavily edited to like a micro fine point. And that in and of itself is a skill. And then it finishes with mixing the song. So that was kind of, you know, the getting all the instruments sounding good, getting everything recorded, getting it edited, and then getting it mixed. And then I wanted to cap all of that off with mastering. So I bought a mastering course from another guy. His name's Streaky, and he masters so much that you hear on the radio today. He was opening up a session to do part of the course, and there was a folder that, you know, said Dua Lipa. There was a folder that said Ed Sheeran. Like, he's mastering all of that music. So I did his course too. I'm just finishing it up now. And that was really, really good for me too, because mastering's this kind of weird world where so much happens, but it's so subtle and it's kind of confusing, and there's a lot of rules, and it really clarified a lot of things for me. So those are the two that I'm kind of working on right now.
Killer. That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I want to ask, you said you've toured in over, or you've been on tours in over 25 countries, and that in and of itself must bring up some crazy experiences. But again, with Walk Off the Earth, how intricate and crazy their live performances can be. Can you tell us about a time when something crazy happened on tour, or maybe one of your favorite moments from tour, one of your favorite shows?
There's so many. It's tough to boil it down into one. Favorite show? Well, one that stands out, last year we got to play the Red Rocks Amphitheater in Colorado, and that is one of the most incredible venues I've ever been to. It is so insane. You walk out onto that stage, and you can look up pictures of it if you haven't seen it, but there's this huge rock face that just goes up the right side of the amphitheater, and you walk out there and it kind of feels like it's not even real because it's so big. This stage is just built into the side of a mountain. And then I took the time to climb all the way up to the top of the amphitheater, and it overlooks this massive valley, you know, behind the stage. So that was a cool moment. That was a really, really incredible show. Some of the other shows that stand out, there was one show we did in somewhere in the Netherlands. It was this festival called Pink Pop, and it was the first time that we had kind of gotten into the European festival scene, and we were the first band on the main stage, so we kind of got to load in before the park doors opened. And so we loaded in, we set up, we got everything kind of situated and in a good spot. And then we all left the stage because it was, you know, a couple hours before we were going to play. And, you know, I had something to eat, and then I was coming back to the stage just to double check something, and the doors had opened. And in the time that we had been off stage, like 60,000 people had showed up. And I remember walking around the corner onto the stage and just stopping dead in my tracks and going, oh. I called on the radio. I was like, you guys should maybe come to the stage and see this, because like, this is crazy. And everyone kind of trickled out, and we were all just like, ooh, that's a lot of people. So that was a pretty crazy experience. It's the first time you do that is eye-opening.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Lisa, do you have any other specific questions for Zach?
Well, like a million, but
I'm ready.
But I think that we covered some really good ground here, Maddie. Do you want to ask the last one?
Yeah, so basically at the end of every podcast episode, since this podcast is directed toward youth and youth education and music, we like to ask all of our guests, what would be your one piece of advice that you would give to young artists just starting out? Or what would you tell your past self?
Sure, yeah. We kind of already touched on it. Making music's a weird thing, especially when you want to try to make a career out of it. My number one piece of advice would be to not lose hope. And I said it before, but to outwork your peers. So if everyone else is playing here, just work until you're playing here. And if you give yourself that edge and you continue to give yourself that edge and you grind that out year after year, there's no stopping you. You can do some really incredible things that way.
That's some awesome advice. Thank you so much, Zach, for being here. We really enjoyed talking to you. And you have such a wide breadth of experience and such an interesting role in the industry. And I think lots of young artists are going to benefit from this. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great chat.
Thanks for coming. Good to see you again, Zach.
Good to see you, Lisa. And nice to meet you, Maddie.
Nice to meet you too.
Take care, guys.
Bye.